A man who killed a New Mexico State police officer over a year ago has pled to a life sentence in federal court. New Mexico's delegation is seeking legislation that would protect the Gila River and the communities that surround it. We take a look at new graduation data provided by APS, the New Mexico Supreme Court has made a ruling on immunity for 911 dispatchers, and the governor's administration is reorganizing their approach to housing in New Mexico. From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Tuesday, April 22nd, and I'll have more on those stories in a few moments, plus a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast on the other side of this break.
This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, we've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. We work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join us in our mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years.
A life sentence has been handed down for the man who shot and killed a New Mexico State police officer over a year ago. With more on this story, I'm now joined by the Journal's courts reporter, Oliver Udebrook. Oliver, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Gina.
So, Oliver, Jeremy Smith has pled guilty to the killing of New Mexico State police officer Justin Hare. What can you tell us, though, about this saga that had started over a year ago?
Yeah, it started actually in South Carolina, where he is accused of kidnapping and killing a woman, a paramedic, a 52-year-old, and then he stole her car and fled across several states. And 2 days after Phoenicia Mercado Fourier's killing, he ended up near Tucumcari on I-40, where he had a flat tire. And he was trying to flag down motorists on I-40, and the police dispatched Justin Hare to help out the motorists. So he arrived there about 5 a.m. And he asked Smith, what's the matter? And Smith said, well, can you help me? I have a flat tire. And from there, it ended up with Justin Hare being shot. He was shoved into his police car, shoved into the passenger seat of his car, and Smith basically drove off in Hare's police SUV and eventually just dumped him on the side of the highway. And that began like a manhunt. A couple of days later, he was arrested by Bernalillo County Sheriff's deputies in Albuquerque.
And Oliver, this has been a very emotionally charged case for Officer Hare's family. I know they were there at the sentencing at the courthouse. What did they have to say, and what was their reaction to this news?
Yeah, they certainly were. Yeah, his mother is particularly vocal about this. She and her husband as well would have preferred to see Smith executed, put to death for his crime. But they have kind of mixed reactions to this. They did say that it's something of a release for them, that he's finally been sentenced and that he is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. There's no such thing as parole in the federal system, so Smith is going to spend the rest of his life in prison.
And Oliver, I'm curious, when I had a chance to talk to our colleague Matthew Risen a couple months ago when this case was still ongoing, there was the possibility that Smith could be extradited to South Carolina and face the death penalty for the murder of that paramedic. Is that still something that's on the table now that this sentence has been handed down, or has the door been closed on that?
He could very well face the death penalty in South Carolina. I don't know where that case is at the moment, but he's very likely to be charged and tried, adjudicated in some way in South Carolina, and he could potentially face the death penalty there. So that's sort of hanging out there at the present, unresolved.
So Jeremy Smith facing a life sentence for the murder of New Mexico State police officer Justin Hare, and also possibly even a death penalty in South Carolina if that case does move forward. Journal courts reporter Oliver Udebrook with the latest. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Gino.
A new bill from Representative Gabe Vasquez and Senator Martin Heinrich would create more protection for the Gila River, the only free-flowing river in New Mexico. With more on this story, I'm now joined by the Journal's federal government reporter, Kathy Cook. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Gino.
So, Kathy, as we touched on at the top, the representative and the senator are looking to put forth this legislation in order to protect some wilderness and a river here in New Mexico. What can you tell us about the particulars of this legislation?
So they're reintroducing it. Senator Heinrich has introduced, I believe both of them have introduced this bill in the previous session. It would designate the Gila River as a wild and scenic river, which is a designation that matters for protections of water quality and for land management. So it would sort of force the federal government to create comprehensive river management plans and make sure that the river's quality could be maintained, and it would protect it from any efforts to dam the river in New Mexico. There is a dam on the Gila in Arizona, so not in New Mexico. And it's part of a larger push from the Congressional Delegation to protect public lands.
And Kathy, this legislation is really kind of looking to achieve two things at once, because one, it wants to protect the river, but two, it could have positive effects on local economies for towns like Silver City.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about these kind of land protections being pushed at the federal level by members of our congressional delegation, the conversation for them is always about the people who live in these communities by these public lands. So when we think about this particular bill, the Gila River is near Silver City. Silver City's economy relies on the outdoor recreation that is brought in by the Gila River and all the visitors that come in because of the Gila River and because of the Gila National Forest that's right there. Historically it was a mining town, and now it's reliant on outdoor recreation to fund its economy. And we can see that with other bills like this that the delegation's introducing to protect public lands, including the Pecos Watershed Protection Act. When we hear Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez, Senator Martin Heinrich talk about that bill, they're talking about the Pecos community that lives near that river and the worries in that community about mining impacting their quality of life.
And Kathy, a lot of these bills are reintroductions, as you mentioned earlier, and they're in responses to actions taken by the Trump administration. I was hoping you could expand a little bit on that and why these bills are needing to be brought up again.
Yeah, so these bills are kind of, they're all reintroductions. So these are certainly things that our members of our congressional delegation have prioritized before and are priorities for them. But the reintroduction of these bills also comes as kind of a pushback to the Trump administration's efforts to increase domestic energy production, right? So there's a lot of things we're seeing the Trump administration do to try to make that happen. So President Trump has signed an executive order back in March to encourage streamlining mineral production here in the U.S., domestic mineral production. And so we see the Interior Department announced last week that they are sort of cutting out part of the environmental review process that was planned for some oil and gas lease applications to speed up those oil and gas leases getting approved or not getting approved, going through that process. And that includes leases here in New Mexico. So there's multiple ways that the Trump administration is trying to use public lands or increase the use of public lands for energy production.
So we'll keep an eye on these pieces of legislation as they continue to work their way through Congress. Journal Federal Government reporter Kathy Cook with the latest. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Gina.
In other headlines from the newsroom, Albuquerque Public Schools reported a 4% increase in graduation rates for the class of 2024, bringing the overall district rate to nearly 76%. This marks the second consecutive year of improvement, following a 2% rise in 2023. Several APS high schools posted strong graduation outcomes. La Cueva High led with a 91.3% graduation rate, followed by Volcano Vista at 89% and Sandia at 82%. Notably, Highland High School made a major leap, improving from 55% in 2023 to 66% in 2024, one of the largest gains in the district. The district's progress reflects a broader statewide trend. The New Mexico Public Education Department announced a statewide graduation rate of 78% in 2024, the highest in 15 years, up from 76% the year prior. Other Albuquerque area schools showing measurable gains included Valley, El Dorado, Rio Grande, and Albuquerque High. However, not all schools improved. Del Norte High saw a slight 0.2% decline, and West Mesa experienced nearly a 4% drop. Superintendent Gabriella Blakey acknowledged the progress, but emphasized the need for continued improvement, stating, quote, "We're going in the right direction, but I know we can do better." In a unanimous decision, the New Mexico Supreme Court clarified Monday that 911 dispatchers and their agencies can be held legally liable from damages stemming from negligent responses to emergency calls. The ruling stems from a tragic 2020 case involving 16-year-old Isaac Breeley Rude, who died of heat stroke following a delayed emergency response during a hike near Las Cruces. His family alleges multiple errors by dispatchers and responders led to fatal delays. Responders arrived over 80 minutes after the initial 911 call, and incorrect location data hindered access to the teen. The lawsuit filed in 2022 named the Messalea Valley Regional Dispatch Authority, several dispatchers, Doña Ana County, and other agencies. The federal court overseeing the case asked the state Supreme Court to clarify whether a newer statute, the Enhanced 911 Act, grants immunity to 911 personnel. Defendants argued it did, despite an older law permitting lawsuits for dispatcher negligence. Justice Michael V. Hill, writing for the court, rejected the immunity claim. The court determined that the newer law mainly covered infrastructure and funding, but does not shield dispatchers from negligent claims. He wrote that such a major shift wouldn't be made through vague language in an unrelated statute. The Brealey family welcomed the decision, saying it brings them one step closer to justice and could help prevent further tragedies. The case will now proceed in federal court. The Department of Public Safety declined to comment, and other defenders have not responded publicly. And Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is reorganizing her administration's approach to housing policy, transferring the state office of housing from the governor's office to the Department of Workforce Solutions. The move comes alongside the sudden departure of her housing policy advisor, whose last day was on April 3rd. The shift is intended to improve the efficiency and accountability of housing initiatives, especially as the state grapples with rising rent and housing costs. The governor, currently on a trade mission in Asia, said the state's significant financial investments in housing must produce results quickly. Initially created administratively in 2023 after legislation to establish it failed, the Office of Housing now moves under the Labor Department's umbrella. Though the move may be temporary, the office's 4 staffers will evaluate and recommend a permanent home for it in the coming months. Workforce Solutions Secretary Sarita Nair supported the change, noting that house shortages are the top concerns among employers, job seekers, and workforce staff across the state. This year, the legislature approved $110 million in funding for affordable and transitional housing efforts, with additional funding for services aiding seniors, individuals with opioid use disorders, and responses to homeless encampments. However, some of the governor's more controversial proposals, like criminalizing panhandling at medians, have met resistance in the legislature. This restructuring signals a more integrated approach to housing and workforce development as the state aims to tackle its growing housing crisis. If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on the Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect sunny skies with a high near 80, and as for this evening, partly cloudy with a low around 46. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. That's the Leading News. I'm Gino Gutierrez. We'll be back tomorrow.